Xavi, because I keep seeing these differing reports, and I'm sure Chelsea fans are a little bit, I wouldn't use the word confused, but a little bit, oh, what's going on here? Because sometimes it looks really close, and there are other times where it looks as though it's taking too long and it's problematic.
It's actually quite a complicated deal on the club-to-club side, even though on the player side, Xavi wants Chelsea, he's removed his Leipzig bio. They're in verbal talks because I don't think Chelsea want to formally bid until they've basically got a verbal agreement in principle. Because if it's let slip out in the market what kind of price the clubs are talking about, you might get some hijack attempts, particularly from Bayern. And let's see whether Arsenal even enter the race. They like the player. Everyone's assuming they're going to bid for Eberechi Eze, but that release clause is gone. And naturally, Crystal Palace could just say, you still got to pay 68 million or you'll walk away. And then Arsenal might see that valuation as too high. But the reason why it's complicated, I think if there's one transfer you want to understand in all the micro detail, it's this one, is because Leipzig bought Xavi Simons from PSG in January. They only bought him in January after the loans, because up until that January, 100% of any money from the transfer went to PSV, not PSG, his former club. So PSG waited and waited and waited and loaned him until the clause expired. 100% sell-on was removed. In fact, not just to sell on any profit, the entire fee, from what I understand. And then they sold him because he was always seen as surplus to requirements, because just not a profile that Luis Enrique really thought was a fit and has other options in that area. So then in January, Leipzig pay 50 million euros and 30 million in add-ons, but in January. So Chelsea's perspective is that a large amount of those add-ons haven't been paid because he's only been at the club for 7 months. And Leipzig don't have to declare what they've paid PSG, what the break even is, what the PSG sell-on is. And naturally, it's in PSG's interest if Chelsea have got insiders and sources, as people tend to do in the market, much like we do as journalists. These sporting directors are reading the market and asking around to try and get as much intel as possible. PSG have an interest in saying all 30 million add-ons have been paid, because then the break even is 80 million and it means it's a bigger fee and they get a bigger sell-on. And they've definitely got a sell-on in the region of 50% that I think goes down by the games played or time. So it starts at 50, but I think it's variable and sliding, and it decreases very quickly, which means it's probably at about 15 or 20% now. But I'm told that's complicated and that's not black and white. So Chelsea are there thinking, you paid 50 million euros. It's got to be more than 50 million euros. If we offer you a 5-10 million profit for 7 months, then that's good business for you, because he's not been at the club for long. And obviously Leipzig are saying, wait a minute, our break even is 65 or 70. And there's no way of knowing because it won't be declared directly to Chelsea. So they've been haggling verbally, and both sides have stuck to their position. Chelsea with a lower number, Leipzig with a higher number. And now we have to wait and see whether post-Benjamin Sesko, because Leipzig have brought in money that they needed, if they're even more bullish that this has to be a number closer to 70 million euros, or actually, if their finances are fine and Xavi Simons wants to move, if they're prepared to cave later in the window. Because I don't think there's a scenario where he'll just stay at Leipzig. I'm not sure that the player will allow that, which is why he's been so aggressive. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. There hasn't been a formal bid, but that doesn't mean there hasn't been a bid. And it comes back to what I said before, that sometimes these deals are done at the top of both clubs with verbal back and forth. And if you place a bid, it gets out there. And if that bid is really low, maybe others in the market use that intel and think this is worth a hijack because the starting point is 5 or 10 million more than we thought when we first considered the player. And that's kind of where we're at. So I'm still expecting Chelsea to bid. Maybe they'll want to get Christopher and Nkunku out. Maybe they'll be looking to resolve Nico Jackson's future as well. But there remains a realistic chance that Xavi Simons is a Chelsea player between now and the end of the window. I just think the negotiations are a little bit more complicated for the reasons I mentioned compared to the talks between Manchester United and Chelsea for Alejandro Garnacho. But it is Xavi Simons and Garnacho, not Xavi Simons or Garnacho.
Yeah, no, as you say, far more complex because of the sort of weird or unorthodox goings on in terms of him arriving. I'd have loved to have seen. We obviously never. The industry was so different back then, or this didn't even exist. What we do now, I'd have loved to have seen all the transfers when Man United were trying to get, Carlos Tevez and had to loan him, the joint ownerships. Do you remember that the sagas with the both Mascherano and Tevez, the way their ownership issues. I'd have loved to have seen how those would have played out because obviously transfers play out so much more in the public now than they used to. That would have been such a complicated one for fans to be able to digest at the time because although they seem to go through very quickly, you can imagine there was so much negotiations and talks and problems and lawyers involved with those deals. So yeah, these things often happen. This here says, please. We'll come back to Arsenal in a minute with that super chat, my friend. We won't ignore the super chats. We'll just come back to them a little bit later in the show. What are Chelsea looking to do centre back wise? Because obviously there's a rumor going around that Colwell, or confirmed now, I think that Colwell's going to be out for the majority of the season. Will Chelsea look to buy another centre back, or could it now be Hato that was brought in to be more left back cover is used more as a centre back cover?
Yeah, I think that's very logical. So an exclusive that I broke last night that Levi Colwill had undergone successful ACL surgery and as a result is going to be out for a large part of the season. I think the feeling is the surgery went well. I know all surgery in theory, if you fix the problem or address it, is successful, but actually the recovery time is maybe a little bit less than was first feared, but it's still a standard ACL injury with a surgery. So like with James Maddison, a large part of the season is going to be missed. Chelsea's perspective is first, as you allude to, Jorel Hato, even though he's been signed as left-back predominant and cover competition for Marc Cucurella, can play left centre-back and played a lot of left centre-back before Francesco Farioli converted him when he was at Ajax to a left-back predominant player. So that's one option. Renato Vega could stay, and he's the sort of Swiss Army knife. And Chelsea really like Renato Vega. So everyone's working on the assumption that they either don't think he's good enough or they want to sell. But actually, this is a player-driven move. He wanted Atletico Madrid. He wanted his loan to Juventus because he wants to play every week at centre-back because he knows that we're heading into a World Cup year. And that's what he thinks is best for his Portugal chances. And he does now have some Saudi interest. But given for large parts of the season, a player like Renato Vega might get opportunities now at centre-back. Maybe he and Chelsea change their mind about an exit. I think that's 50-50 at the moment. He could still stay, but there obviously is interest in the player. But there's another kind of Swiss Army knife option. And then my understanding is Enzo Maresca has no issue playing two right-sided centre-backs if he needs to. So that might be good news for Trevor Chalobah, for example, who, again, is a 50-50, could stay, could go, but maybe now they change their mind. Chelsea have obviously still got Benoit Badiashile. They've got Wesley Fofana. They've got Tosin. And they also need to think about the pathways of some of these younger defenders on both sides, like Mamadou Sarr or Aaron Anselmino. So if they sign somebody else, maybe you're adding one too many, in which case you get a Band-Aid and a short-term fix. But in the long run, you've maybe overstocked. And you need to also think about staggering the age groups. So a lot of people asking me about Mark Gahey. Mark Gahey's, I think, only just turned 25 or 26. I can't remember off the top of my head. And there's like a 2.5 year difference between him and Levi Colwill. So imagine if you sign Mark Gahey and everyone says perfect, but then come, let's just call it March, Levi Colwell's fit is the most important months leading up to a World Cup. And you've got two England defenders, both fighting for the same spot in a Chelsea team, both wanting to play every week in the build up to the World Cup. In which case, I think Mark Gahey may turn around now and say, maybe it's better I just see out my Palace contract, play every week, captain the club, resolve my future as a free transfer. So as Liverpool are going to find and others, if you want Mark Gahey, it's not just about going, there's a market opportunity because Palace want to sell, because Gay's not going to sign a new deal. It's about persuading the player, are you going to get enough minutes? And I suspect anyone going to Gahey is going to have to give long-term guarantees, including the back half of the season, not just if it was Chelsea, you'll play in the short term whilst Levi Colwill is out. And then we can't give you those guarantees because they would both be outstanding players in the same position. So that's the challenge. And I think at the moment, Chelsea seem quite calm about the situation. And I think their first consideration is to work out internally whether they've got solutions rather than go out into the market and kind of panic buy in the short term and then give themselves a long-term problem when Levi Colwill returns.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, as you say, and that's always a way up. And the Gahey situation is an interesting one. Viewers, listen, any more